Hello and welcome back to another full step-by-step PC build guide, and today I'm going to be showing you how to build a PC in the latest case from Phanteks. This is the Eclipse G400i. If you see any parts you like, you'll find links to all the parts I've used in the description, so let's make a start by taking a detailed look at the case. To remove our tempered glass side panel, there's two captive thumb screws at the back we're going to need to loosen. Once these have been loosened, we're going to be able to slide the panel backwards, tilt out and lift away. And our other side panel is removed in exactly the same way. Taking a look at our right side panel, you notice we have this large perforated area down at the bottom, and this is to act as a source of airflow for fans mounted on the power supply shroud. Taking a look at our top I/O, we've got a power and reset button, a combined headphone and microphone jack, we've got two USB Type A ports and a single Type C port. To remove our case's top mesh panel, you can get your thumb in here at the back and pop the panel up and then lift it backwards to remove it. To remove our case's front mesh panel, you can simply pop it out from the top and lift away. And it's great to see we've got a separate dust filter beneath this. It's removed in exactly the same way, pop it out from the top and lift away. So it's great to see we've got three of Phanteks' M25 140 Gen 2 fans pre-installed at the front. And in terms of fan and radiator compatibility at the front, three 140mm fans is all you can fit. There's no mounting support for 120mm fans or radiators at the front of the case. So the only thing we need to do is remove the plastic protection from the fans and replace our front panel. We've got another M25 140 Gen 2 fan pre-installed at the rear of the case, and if you prefer the rear, it is possible to mount either a 120mm fan or radiator. Up top, it's up to three 120 or two 140mm fans, or up to 360 or 280mm radiator. Our final fan mounting location is on our power supply shroud, where you're able to fit up to three 120mm fans. You can see we've got these small screw holes here. The idea is you're going to set your fans on top and then use the long radiator screws that are included in the case accessory box to screw down into the bottom of the case through the fans. And this mesh panel on the side of the case should act as a good source of airflow for fans mounted on the power supply shroud, and we've got this really nice RGB lighting bar just above it. In terms of motherboard support, it looks like the case should support motherboards up to AITX, and you can see we've got additional cutouts for back connector AITX motherboards. If you want to go with an air cooler, the maximum height supported is up to 184mm. You can see at the rear of the case we've got 7 horizontal PCI expansion slot brackets, and in terms of graphics card support, the maximum length supported is up to 415mm. Moving to the rear of the case, we can see we've got 2 rubber grommets to the right hand side of our motherboard. Cable routing space looks to be pretty good, and in terms of cable management, this should be pretty easy. We've got these cable raceways in the centre with plenty of Velcro cable straps. So it's great to see that all 4 of our pre-installed case fans have already been connected up together. So to power them, all you're going to need to do is plug this PWM cable into a system fan header on your motherboard, and this 3-pin 5V ARGB cable into a header on your motherboard to light them up. Alternatively, if you want to go with a Phanteks ARGB controller, rather than using the ARGB cable, you can plug this connector directly into the controller. We've got a hard drive cage at the bottom of the case, and this is where we're going to find our case accessory box. To remove it, there's a captive thumb screw at the bottom we need to loosen, and then with it loosened, we're going to be able to pull the hard drive cage towards us and lift it up to remove it. So this is everything that comes in that case accessory box. So I don't think I've ever got so many cable ties with any case. We've got the long radiator screws to secure fans to our power supply shroud, and we've got a little bag containing all the screws we're going to need for the build. So on top of our hard drive cage, you're able to fit either two 2.5-inch drives or a single 3.5-inch drive. So your 2.5-inch drives are simply going to sit on top, and then you're going to be able to screw them in from underneath. Alternatively, you can fit a 3.5-inch drive on top, and again screw in from underneath. So once you've installed whatever drives you want to put on top of the hard drive cage, you are also able to fit a 3.5-inch drive in the hard drive cage itself. So simply slot it in from the front, and then you're going to be able to secure the drive with the holes at the side. Our power supply is going to go down at the bottom, and the case supports full-sized AITX power supplies up to a maximum length of 270mm. And you can see we've got a dust filter over our power supply's intake, and this can be pulled out from the back before cleaning. We're now ready to start working our motherboard, and we're going to be installing our CPU, the backplate for our CPU cooler, our M.2 SSD and our RAM before we put the motherboard into the case. To open our socket cover, we need to push this lever down and out, bring it all the way to the top of the motherboard, and then we can open the socket cover up. We can then lower our CPU down into the socket, taking care to hold it by the edges. And once we're happy it's sitting correctly in the socket, we can go ahead and close our socket cover down again. Then as we close this lever, the black bit of plastic should pop off, and we'll put it in our motherboard box for safekeeping. I'm going to be installing the M.2 SSD in the top slot, so to remove the heatsink we need to push this lever down, Then we're going to be able to tilt the heatsink up and remove it. We can remove the plastic protection from the heatsink and also the heat pad. Then we can insert our M.2 SSD into the socket, and to secure it, all we need to do is flatten it down, and this little clip will hold it in place. And we can then return our heatsink. We're going to be installing our RAM in the second and fourth slot along from the CPU, so we'll open the clips on these slots. We can then line our RAM up with the slots. Once we're happy it's lined up, it's just some firm pressure and it's going to clip into place. Next, we've got the backplate for our CPU cooler to install. We're installing this in an LGA 1851 socket, which is the same mounting holes as LGA 1700. So if you're going to be doing this, you're going to make sure you pull all these little pins to their outer setting. You can see we've got some double-sided adhesive here, which will help this stick to the back of the motherboard. You can pull this off if you want to stick it on. It's a temporary build for me, so I'm not going to stick it down. And then all we need to do is line it up with holes in the back of the motherboard, and once it's lined up, it should simply fall through. Then you're going to want to find the bag of standoffs labelled LGA 1700, and we're going to screw one onto each corner. Next, we can set the motherboard into the case, line it up with the standoffs at the back. And you'll notice that once the middle standoff goes through the middle hole in the motherboard, it's going to help hold the motherboard in place. And then we can screw the motherboard into place using 9 of the screws with a little lip around the outside. Next, we've got our case cables to plug in. Our HD audio cable is going to go into this header down the bottom left of the motherboard. So we can go ahead and bring the cable through the cutout, and we're going to plug it in with the HD audio text facing up the way. Our front panel connectors are going to go into this header down the bottom right of the motherboard, so we can bring the cable through the cutout, and we're going to plug it in again with the text facing up the way. We've then got our front panel Type-C cable to plug in, and this motherboard's quite a high-end motherboard with 2 front panel Type-C headers. The top one supports faster speeds of up to 20 gigabits per second, so that's the one I'm going to plug the cable into. So we'll bring the cable through the cutout, line it up, and push into place. We've then got our USB 3.0 cable, which is going to go into this header here. Now it's a right angle connector, so we're going to struggle if we try to bring it through this cutout. So I'm going to bring it in through the rubber grommet, line it up, and push into place. So that just leaves us 2 cables still to plug in, and they are the cables coming from our 4 pre-installed case fans. So we've got a 4-pin PWM cable, and we've also got a 3-pin 5-volt ARGB cable, or we've also got this JST connector that works with Phanteks hubs. So there's 2 different options for this. The first thing would be simply plug these into headers on your motherboard and use your motherboard's software and BIOS settings to control the fans. So Phanteks have sent out their brand new NextLink hub, which is the option I'm going to be going for. So we're actually going to be able to plug all the additional case fans that we're going to plug in. We're going to be able to plug the fans from our IO into here and control everything using this hub. So you'll find links to this in the description. It's going to cost you around about $25. But if you do want to go with this option, just simply plug these into your motherboard. So taking a closer look at our hub, we've got 3 channels, 1, 2, and 3. So into channel number 1 and 2, we're going to be able to use a single cable coming from our IO and a single cable coming from the case fans. We're going to install in our power supply throughout. And that one cable, we're going to be able to control both the lighting effects on the fans as well as their speed. Channel 3 is slightly different and it offers legacy support. So we've got a 4-pin PWM connector and also a JST connector, which is exactly the cables we've got coming from our 4 pre-installed case fans. So we're going to be able to plug the cables into here to control not only their speed, but also their ARGB effects. We're going to have to power the hub, and we've got a 6-pin PCIe connector on the bottom. So we plug a cable coming from our power supply into it, it's going to power it. And we're also going to need to connect it up to our motherboard, and there's 2 different options for doing this. The first is USB, so we can plug in the included USB cable. The other end of the cable we're going to plug into a USB 2.0 header on our motherboard, and we're going to be able to use then Phanteks' NextLink software to control the speed and ARGB effects on the fans. So it is also possible to use it without any software. So instead of using the USB cable, what you could do is use this cable to connect it up to your motherboard's PWM and ARGB hub. So it is possible to use the hub without software. On the other end, we've got this cable. So we can plug it into the cable that comes with the hub. And then the other end, we've got a PWM and ARGB cable. And if we plug this into our motherboard, we're going to be able to use our motherboard software to control the hub. So we're not actually going to need to use any software. So it is nice the options you have. We can use this USB cable and Phanteks' software to control the fans. Alternatively, we can use the cable on this side to use our motherboard software to control the lighting and speed of the fans. And if you don't actually use either of these, the hub will still work, but the fans will run at 100% in terms of their speed, and it will default to rainbow settings. So not an option you're going to want to use. You're going to want to either use the USB or the PWM and ARGB connector. Okay, so I'm going to take the JST connector coming from our fans and plug it into port number 3. And also our PWM cable and plug it into port number 3. And one nice thing about this hub is it is magnetic, so we just set it here on the case. We've got two USB 2.0 headers down the bottom of the motherboard, so I'm going to bring the USB cable coming from our hub through, and we're going to plug it in with the USB text facing up the way. So completely optional, but I am going to plug the PWM cable and the ARGB cable coming from our hub into the motherboard to allow me the option of using motherboard control. So we've got a system fan header at the top of the motherboard. We can bring the cable through and get it plugged into our first system fan header. We've also got an ARGB header at the top of the motherboard, so we'll bring the ARGB cable through and get it plugged in. So we're now ready to install our power supply. I've gone ahead and plugged the cables in we're going to need. So I plugged in a 24-pin motherboard cable, two 8-pin EPS cables to provide additional power to our CPU. I plugged in two PCIe cables. One is to power our NextLink hub, and the other is to provide additional power to our motherboard. And I've also plugged in a 12-volt high power cable to power our graphics card. So we can then install our power supply into the case, making sure we install it with the fan facing down the way. Then secure the power supply into place using 4 of the power supply screws from the case accessory box. Our two 8-pin EPS cables are going to go into these headers at the top left of the motherboard, so we can bring them through the cutout, line them up with the headers and push into place. And then we'll just tidy up the cables using the included cable combs. So our motherboard has an additional PCIe connector on it, and if we plug a cable into here, it's going to improve the speed of our fast charging via our front panel Type-C header. Now, plugging this cable in is completely optional, and if you have a motherboard without this connector, just ignore this step. So we can bring one of our PCIe cables through the cutout, we'll line it up with a header and push into place, and then we'll just use the cable combs to help organize the cable. We've got a 24-pin header just above it, so we'll bring our 24-pin cable through the cutout, line it up with the header, and push into place. And then again, we'll just tidy up the cables using the included cable combs. And then lastly, we just need to power our hub, so we'll plug a 6-pin PCIe cable into the hub. We're now ready to install our I/O, and the first thing we need to do is set our fans onto the radiator. So it's great to see that all 3 of our fans are already connected together, and you can see the cables connecting the fans on one side. The other side, we don't have any connecting cables, so this is the side you're going to want to have facing the tempered glass panel. So it means for us, we're going to be installing it this way around. We can then secure the fans to the radiator using the long radiator screws. We then got some plastic covers which will hide the screw holes. In terms of connecting our fans up, we're going to use this long cable to connect them up to our pump. So we've got a male connector on this end of the fans, and we're going to plug them into the female connector on the connecting cable and push them into place. Then if we take a look at the cable coming from our pump, we're going to plug the other end of the cable into it. So because I'm using Phantex's NextLink hub, I'm going to be able to plug this directly into a port on the hub. If you're not planning on doing this, there is an optional cable included with the I/O that you can plug in to bring you back to more standard connectors. And then on the other end of the cable, you've got a 4-pin PWM connector to go into your CPU fan header. And we've got a 3-pin 5-volt ARGB cable to go into a header on your motherboard. The other cable coming from it is a JST connector, and that would also go into an older Phantex hub. The other cable coming from our pump is a 3-pin fan connector, and we just need to plug this into the pump header on our motherboard. So it's good to see that our I/O comes with thermal paste pre-applied, and we've got Intel bracket installed in the pump, which is going to be perfect for this build. So we're going to pass the cable coming from our fans through to the back of the case, and then we're going to be able to set our I/O up into place at the top. And we'll secure our I/O into place at the top using the included short radiator screws. And at this stage we can replace our top panel. Next we can remove the plastic protection from our I/O, and in terms of the cables, I just like to route them up around the bracket so it helps keep the cables organised running towards the top of the case. We can then line our I/O up with the bracket we've installed on the motherboard, and we've just got a thumb screw to go on to each corner. Then we're just going to want to tighten each corner up in turn. I'm just going to pass this larger cable through to the back, and our 3-pin fan connector I'm going to plug into our pump header at the top. Then at the back of the case we can join the cable coming from our fans on the radiator into the cable coming from our pump. And then we're just going to plug this into port number 1 on our hub. So as we've already mentioned, if you're not planning on using this hub, simply plug that cable into the spare cable that comes with our AIO. And from the other end of the cable, plug the 4-pin fan connector into your CPU fan header and the ARGB cable into an ARGB header on your motherboard. So I've got 3 120mm fans for the bottom, and brilliant to see that these come out of the box joined together. So all that we're going to need to do is plug our connecting cable into the end of the fans, and coming from the other end of the cable, we're going to be able to plug this directly into our hub. Again, if you decided not to use the Nextlink hub, you're going to plug the other cable that comes with the fans into here. On the other end of that cable, you've got a 4-pin PWM connector. You're going to plug that into a system fan header on your motherboard, and then you've got a 3-pin 5V ARGB cable to plug into an ARGB header on the motherboard, and you've also got a JST connector if you've got a legacy Phanteks hub. So we can pass our fan cable through to the back of the case and then set our fans into place at the bottom. We're then going to use the long radiator screws that came with the case to secure the fans to the case. And then we can install the screw covers. So you'll notice these are reverse plate fans, so they'll be bringing cooler into our graphics card. And last thing to do is plug the bottom fans into port number 2 on our hub. We're now ready to install our graphics card, so we'll need to remove the 2nd and 3rd expansion slot bracket from the top. I'm just going to bring our 12V type power cable through the cutout at the bottom first, because once the graphics card's installed, it's going to be quite difficult to fit this through. We can then line our graphics card up with a slot. And once we're happy everything's lined up, it's just some firm pressure, and the graphics card is going to clip into place. And we'll secure the graphics card with the 2 thumb screws we've just removed. We can then plug our 12V type power cable into the graphics card, and we'll pull the excess cable through to the bottom of the case. So our graphics card really is sagging quite badly, and it really does need a GPU support bracket. Now unfortunately the one that comes with a GPU is actually too small with the fans installed. It'd be perfectly fine if it was sitting on the bottom of the case, but then it's not going to be able to support the graphics card. So there we go, problem solved. I've managed to get our GPU support bracket in behind the graphics card, and that does seem to be doing a good job of supporting our graphics card. Always important when you're using one of these brackets, just double check your fans to make sure it's not interfering with it, which it doesn't seem to be doing. Okay, last thing to do is some cable management to get the panels back on again. Okay, so that's the build complete. As you can see, I've gone ahead and set the PC up off camera. If you don't know how to do that, I've made another video that covers all of that, including installing Windows, the drivers, the RGB software, entering the BIOS, updating the BIOS, and adjusting all the BIOS settings. And you'll find a link to that video in the description. There's a couple of things you may want to do in addition to that. First thing is, whenever your PC starts up, you will get a warning with this motherboard about not having anything plugged into the CPU fan header, and you will have to enter the BIOS to disable that fan warning. Another thing you probably noticed is I have changed the RAM out from the kit I started at. The reason for doing that is one of the modules I could not get the ARGB effects to work. I think it was a problem with a faulty module. So I'll include links to both the kits I've used in the description. And the final thing you probably want to know is how to adjust your fan speeds and ARGB effects on the fans using Phanteks' Nextlink software. I'm going to cover all that in the AIO installation guide, and I'll put a link to that video in the description. What I'm going to do now is some thermal testing, and then I'm going to be back with a case review. And if you want to hear what I thought about this case, you're going to want to check out that video, and I'll put a link to it in the description. If you have enjoyed this video, please remember to give it a thumbs up, and if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.